Good day, everyone. So, let us again continue our discussion on emerging technology, specifically in Geographic Information System or GIS. Okay, so here's the outline of our discussion today. We will have this introduction to cartography, the principles of map design, no? Creating effective maps, visual appeal in map design, real world applications, challenges in map design, and tools and resources. This will be short, no? We only have here 9 slides, but to augment this discussion, I have prepared again videos for us to watch. Okay, so ano ba ang cartography? So basically, cartography is the art and science of map making. It involves the creation, study, and interpretation of maps, encompassing the design, production, and use of maps for various purposes. For example, no, physical maps, yung binabibili natin, depict geographical features like mountains, rivers, and forests. No? Next one naman is thematic maps that focus on specific topics such as population distribution or climate patterns. But most commonly, we have the physical maps na kung saan makikita natin doon yung iba't ibang features ng geographical locations. Again, cartography is the art and science of map making. So, kung gusto niyo mag-proceed dito, magiging map makers kayo, no? Cartographers, no? It involves the creation, study, and interpretation of maps, encompassing the design, production, and use of maps for various purposes. Okay, again, to augment this presentation, I have here prepared two videos for you to watch.
Take a look at this map. This is Ptolemy's map of the known world, constructed from his 2nd century work, The Geography. Obviously, it's not perfect. In fact, to our modern eyes, it almost looks like an American drew it. But you can see that, even back in these ancient times, people knew roughly how the landmasses around them were shaped. But how did the Greeks or the Romans or any pre-satellite civilization work out how the world and the landmasses on it were shaped? And just how did they make these maps without the help of a bird's eye view? This video is brought to you by Skillshare. Maps are arguably some of the best things ever invented by humanity. And that's not just me saying that as a geography nerd. Okay, actually that's mostly me saying that as a geography nerd, but still, you cannot deny how amazingly useful maps truly are. Coming in all shapes and sizes, they tell us not just about the world or the universe around us, but how to navigate said world, how said world is doing, or how we thought of the world at a particular time. Now, something at least I've always wondered is, how did people in ancient times work out how these coastlines were shaped? Well, let's put ourselves in the shoes of the ancient Greeks and try to figure out how they mapped the world they knew. So first, where do you start? Well, maybe your first instinct will be to take your map and drawing utensils and sail around all the Mediterranean coasts. And you could easily do that for shorter distances, but for longer voyages, not only would this be unnecessary for getting to your destination, there are also a lot of reasons why this would be a bad idea. It would take way too long, it would be incredibly unsafe if you didn't know what you were doing, you wouldn't always know where you were, it would take too long, you could run out of food, it would take too long, and just tracing the coastline won't always give you the best results, at least not for larger areas. However, you could also survey the land around you, and there are many different ways of doing that. These methods and devices included triangulation, as all you Mapman fans among us will recognize, or the groma for building long, straight Roman roads, or rope stretchers measuring the flooding of the Nile in ancient Egypt. However, these were more often used for surveying land to build stuff on top of it, and to tax whatever was built on top of it. So you go to survey the local area, and actually, you don't really need to.
Wait, then why'd you just tell me how to do it?
Well, someone's got to do it for certain areas, but a cartographer's job isn't necessarily to collect all this data, but to compile it together. If you were trying to make a map of the known world in an already established civilization, it's not like you would have had no prior information to work with. With travelers' accounts, navigators' reports, literature, regional maps, and many other sources, many an ancient cartographer made these world maps by simply collecting and compiling all this data, often barely even leaving their hometowns. Anaximander, a philosopher from the 6th century BC, is credited as having made one of the first maps of the world. Anaximander, however, did believe the world to be centered on the Aegean Sea, surrounded by the ocean on all sides, and that this all rested atop a large column. Eratosthenes, a Greek geographer, mathematician, poet, astronomer, and music theorist, born in 276 BC in Cyrene, famously proved what Pythagoras and Aristotle had theorized prior, that the Earth was indeed round. Knowing that the bottom of a well in the southern Egyptian city of Syene, not to be confused with Cyrene, which is near the modern Libyan city of Benghazi, would be illuminated by the sun twice a year, Eratosthenes measured the angle the sunlight hit a well in Alexandria at the same time Syene was under the subsolar point, and using geometry measured the rough circumference of the Earth and got it almost entirely right. Having worked out the size and shape of the Earth, Eratosthenes then decided to map it out, or at least all the parts known to his civilization. Now, it's one thing to know where all the nearby islands and peninsulas were and roughly how far away they probably were, but just because you know roughly how you need to turn a ship to hug the Italian coast doesn't necessarily mean you'll get everything completely right on a map. But Eratosthenes had a new way of measuring how far apart everything was without actually having to measure anything. He came up with a system of parallels and meridians, very much like we use today, creating a sort of grid system over the world. Thus, if you know a place's longitude and latitude, you can easily place it within the right parallels. And luckily, in Alexandria, he had access to the knowledge of the Library of Alexandria, including travel records, meaning there was certainly no shortage of data available to him. Claudius Ptolemy, born in around AD 100 in Roman Egypt, built on the works of Eratosthenes and other famous geographers of the time to make his own map of the world. One of his most well-known works was Geographia, or the Geography, a compilation of all the geographic knowledge available to the Romans at the time. Like Eratosthenes, Ptolemy used the system of parallels and meridians to place cities in well-known areas at certain points of the globe, using data compiled from around the Roman Empire, which there was also certainly no shortage of, to determine a place's latitude and longitude. In fact, none of Ptolemy's original world maps have survived to this day, but the instructions for making them have, and thus they are still quite easy to reconstruct. So, how do you determine a place's latitude and longitude? Well, today you might use something like a GPS, but for thousands of years, we already had our own space-based method of finding where on Earth we were, and all you needed to do was look up. Some of the earliest maps for navigation weren't maps of the Earth at all, but maps of important constellations. Move over, Star Trek and Star Wars, there's a new player in town that's actually already been around for thousands of years, and it's called star charts. Navigators can use basically anything that appears in the sky at regular intervals, including the sun, the moon, the other planets, or the stars and the constellations they form. Figuring out your latitude is actually quite easy. If you're in the northern hemisphere, as these famous cartographers generally were, the star Polaris, known more commonly as the North Star, could be used to determine how far one was from the North Pole. Many different tools have been invented to determine one's latitude, including the astrolabe, sextant, quadrant, theodolite, or whatever else you have to spot stars and measure angles. My personal favorite of these tools, though, has to be the kamal. This 9th and 10th century Arab invention is literally just a small square piece of wood and a knotted string. The idea here is that the closer to the equator you are, the closer Polaris will appear to the horizon, and the further north you go, the higher up Polaris appears. Thus, holding the string in your teeth, you measure how far you need to put the board away from your face for the bottom to touch the horizon and the top to touch Polaris, using the string to record the measurements. Figuring out your longitude, however, is a lot harder, because the Earth spins, meaning a constellation directly to your east will be directly to your west after only a few hours without you even moving, which is really inconsiderate of the stars if you ask me. No, actually, the stars are stationary, the Earth just spins in space. Well, if the Earth is spinning around, why don't we feel it? Well, because it's incredibly subtle on that big of a scale, and that's literally not how any of this works. Checkmate, Copernicus! Thus, in order to track longitude, one thing you would need is an accurate timekeeping device. Hipparchus, in the 2nd century BC, proposed measuring longitude by gathering what times different locations saw solar eclipses. The idea was sound in theory, but ultimately, with the timekeeping technology of the time, didn't seem to go very far. Ptolemy defined the prime meridian as the Fortunate Isles, then the westernmost point of land known to the Roman Empire. Though with no good method of measuring longitude, other than how long the roads between different cities were, and the angles they would have taken, the shape of the known world might have been alright, but he vastly overestimated how wide the world was. That's not to say the Romans didn't have ingenious ways of measuring distance, they most certainly did, but it's not like you could just draw a straight line across the known world and immediately know how wide Eurasia really is. A lot of the process, though, was often just making assumptions about what the rest of the world looked like. For example, since ancient Greek times, it was often assumed that there would need to be the same amount of land in the southern hemisphere as in the northern hemisphere in order to keep the world balanced, even though it turns out that's actually nowhere near true. Thus, a lot of infamous map mistakes have been made. From finding the southern end of Baja California and thus assuming the whole thing would be an island, to noticing that apparently every other continent had a great fertile river and assuming Australia would be the same. Oh my god, someone should make a video about that. When the Age of Discovery update dropped, not only were different parts of the map unlocked to European powers, but new tools were also added to aid in navigation and surveying. The refracting telescope was invented in 1608 and the pendulum clock in 1657, though the latter saw little use at sea because ships also moved side to side. Though these provided huge advantages over dead reckoning. All this allowed for the creation of some of the first true maps of the world. The Europeans obviously weren't alone to the party either. The Arabs and Chinese also made their own world maps, the Arabs even preserving many of the Greek texts we talked about here, and the Polynesians used maps made of sticks and seashells, with the shells representing different islands, and the sticks bent and shaped in certain ways to show how the winds and waves flowed. Now, it's no secret, the precise details on all these maps were incredibly inaccurate. But here's the thing, before maybe the 17th century, most maps were often more symbolic than specific. Back then it was essentially whatever says goes. But here's the thing, did it really matter? I mean, this lack of specificity didn't really seem to hinder the Greek colonists or Arab explorers or Phoenician traders at all. Now, today we need our maps to be super specific for what we do, but the Romans didn't have super specific borders or satellite communication, so could it be that at the time these maps were essentially good enough? I mean, knowing that Italy's shaped like this and not like this isn't necessarily always as important as knowing you're at least heading toward the right part of Italy. Don't get me wrong though, those super oversimplified medieval TNO maps were a sin. Hey, did you notice how good all the animations in this video were? No, not really. Well, I made those in After Effects. And do you want to know just where I learned how to use After Effects? Where? Wait, don't hit me with the logo cannon. Skillshare, I know Skillshare. Through all the amazing courses you can find on Skillshare. Ha! You missed me. Ow! Now, I just started using After Effects after several years of doing absolutely everything in Final Cut Pro. And as difficult as After Effects can be, Skillshare has dozens of classes to help you learn all the different things you can do with After Effects or Photoshop or Illustrator, which I personally found really confusing, as well as more than 20,000 different courses on things completely unrelated to Adobe products, or even computer stuff in general. So if you're not interested in After Effects but still want to learn about photography or cooking or even learning a foreign language, Skillshare is still the place to go. As for which course I'd recommend this video, naturally I'll again recommend Kurzgesagt's course on literally teaching you how they animate their videos, but I'll also recommend Evan Abrams' Introduction to After Effects. So there are courses if you're just starting out or already know a bit. Click the link below to get a free trial of Skillshare Premium when you use the promo code Canubis at checkout. But beware, only the first 1,000 people to click the link will be afforded the opportunity.
From the time mankind developed writing and complex civilization evolved, humans have created maps. Old cartography was used for many different reasons, some spiritual, some economic, much like any form of creativity in ancient times. For the most part, it allowed people to understand their environment and eventually theorize of distant lands. Cartography shapes how we think about the globe, how we see ourselves. In this video, I'm going to briefly explore the history of cartography over the centuries. So what were the first maps? The Babylonians created the first type of maps, carving them onto clay tablets. Some maps were sketches of town structures, but for the most part they were far different than how we would perceive typical maps. On the Babylonian world map, the world was represented by basic geometric shapes, not literal replications on tablet. Their neighbors are deliberately left out, and Babylonian religious matter is labeled as a physical place in the world. Throughout much of human history, mystical lands and religious tales were labeled as factual places on maps. Since satellites did not exist and maps were the only way to see the world, such lands could be seen just as real to the people as Britain or Spain. Say you live in a pre-exploration society where little if anything has been explored. I tell you of a land somewhere out in the Atlantic Ocean. There is no way you can sail to it, and since this map is accurate to others like it, you have no reason to disbelieve it, and no way to disprove it. So for most of human history, areas not left explored are left blank, put into legend, or sometimes guessed with mythical places. The ancient Greeks began to philosophize about the world around them, as ancient Greeks tended to do. What we would traditionally consider a map was first produced by the philosopher Anaximander, and it represented the three continents known to the Greeks at the time: Europe, Asia, and Libya. The Greeks separated Europe from Asia, and the mindset has stuck ever since. At this time, the Greeks believed the Earth was a flat disk with an ocean on the very edge. By antiquity in ancient Greece, it became common knowledge that the Earth was actually a sphere, simply by judging by the stars and sun. With the expansion of Alexander the Great's empire, the Greeks mapped new regions of the Asian continent. For centuries, the smaller Greeks were subject to outside invasions, and so lands past Anatolia were much of a mystery. By Roman times, the Greek-Egyptian Ptolemy created the most extensive view of the Western world. Using research from past scholars, Ptolemy mistakenly theorized the Indian Ocean as a large, enclosed body of water, with the coastline extending from Africa and connecting into Asia. This mistake would be corrected by the Arab cartographer Muhammad ibn Musa al-Khwarizmi in 833. From this point, it became common knowledge that the Indian Ocean was wide open and was not surrounded by land. The Greek philosopher Strabo documented the numerous people across Europe and Asia. At this era, Europeans were beginning to hear about a mysterious civilization on the edge of the continent, the Chinese. Communication between the two was rare, simply from the distance. However, Roman and Chinese items did pass through Persian and Indian merchants. This meant that the Chinese at least were mentioned on the edge of the distant world, or as it was known to the Romans, Serica. The Chinese created maps as well, even as early as 5th century BC. China had created large-scale maps of river systems, towns, and locations for economic purposes. By the Han Dynasty, the Chinese had created complex maps with symbols and cardinal directions. By the Song Dynasty, in the 12th century, the Chinese were able to create stone complex maps of river systems in fantastic detail. When the Romans fell and the Middle Ages began, Europeans looked inward instead of globally. Instability and the spread of Christianity across Europe rapidly changed the population. Interpretations meant that the previously correct advancements in cartography were swept away as they were supposedly false according to the literal biblical beliefs. Some even theorized the Earth was square due to certain passages. The medieval maps were not meant for navigation, they were more symbolic, meant to illustrate the perception of the world at the time. A common style of map was the T&O, a simplified pattern which split the world into 3 different zones: Europe, Asia, and Africa. The T was the Mediterranean, and the O was the global ocean which surrounded the continents. In the medieval age, the Arabs, with their new conquest of the Middle East and North Africa, had begun a new age of learning. Arab cartographers not only corrected Ptolemy's predictions, but also navigated India and Central Asia as well. These important findings would then be helpful to the Europeans in the following centuries. T&O maps were becoming unpopular, and in the 13th century, Italian scholars invented the Portolan chart, allowing for far better documentation of the coastlines and allowing for more accurate trade routes. By the Renaissance, Europe was once again willing to explore. The Ottomans had made the traditional route between Asia and Europe unreliable, and so Europeans began looking to new regions. The Age of Discovery had begun. Columbus was not the first European to the Americas. Columbus was not the one to discover the Earth was round. Columbus's actions simply led to European attention to the Americas. This map, the map of Juan de la Cosa, who traveled with Columbus, is the first documentation of the Americas, with sketches of the Caribbean islands back in 1500. Although at the time it was assumed to be Asia. This new rush for colonies spurred the Europeans to invest in the sciences, cartography, and new advances to explore the world. Spanish monarchs financed expeditions, which allowed explorers to create maps such as this. Now, we get to our modern age. In our world, it's hard to imagine never being able to see what our planet looks like. but for almost all of human history, artistically drawn and recently scientific maps were the only thing people had to picture the world itself. For thousands of years, mankind only saw the world through drawings. It wasn't until just decades ago with the space program when humans got the first pictures of what our planet actually looked like. This relates to us because cartography has shaped how we perceive ourselves in the world. With GPS, our world feels smaller, and with the internet, more connected. You can click on Google Maps and traverse literal pictures of anywhere on the globe. Men died just to explore the same region. We can now navigate with our computer mouse. This is just a quick overview to briefly teach the history of cartography, maybe get you interested in looking into these old maps by yourself. I hope you do. This is Cody of Geography Hub.
So let us continue our discussion on cartography. So here are the importance of map design. Okay, so we have effective communication, navigation, decision making, education, and representation. When we say effective communication, maps serve as a powerful means of communicating spatial information and complex data. Sabihin, 'pag tinignan mo yung mapa 'no, maintindihan mo kaagad kung ano ba ibig sabihin kung ano ba ang meron sa mapa. For example, binigyan ka ng mapa, meron kang nakitang kulay, black or kulay white. Either it is the, national highway or the expressway. Yung kasi ang representation ng mga highways natin, either black or yellow. Depende sa inyo kung paano nyo 'to ipe-present. But for the standard, meron tayong black, white, and yellow. So dun pa lang mako-communicate mo na kung ano ba ang meron sa iyong mapa. So ito pala is, kalsada 'no? And 'pag nakita naman ng mga tao na yung mapa mo is merong blue na line, sabihin ano yun? Ilog, sapa, dagat, 'no? So yun ang ibig sabihin ng pagde-design ng mapa. It's the way of communicating effectively. Okay? Again, map serves as a powerful means of communicating spatial information and complex data. Pag naglagay ka ng triangle, sabihin, mountain area or mountainous area, di ba? Gano'n lang yan. Navigation. Navigation is important in map design because it provides directions, locations, places, and planning routes. Okay? For example, meron kang mapa, meron kang nakitang arrow to the right, arrow to the left, or continuous line, no? So doon pa lang makikita mo, ito palang daan na to is ang pupuntahan ko pala is going to the right kasi nandun yung arrow na sinasabi ng mapa. So doon pa lang mana-navigate mo na kung paano ka makararating doon sa destination mo. Okay? Because it provides the viewer, the user, no, the correct directions, locating places and planning routes. The third one is decision making. Ano naman itong decision making na to? It aids decision makers by visually presenting information for analysis. For example, isa kang map maker or cartographer, no? And then you are working in a company or for example in the local government unit wherein they want to have a area where they could erect or build houses or housing units for their population. So, gagawa ka ng mapa, papakita mo doon kung saan ba yung flat area na malayo sa mountainous area, na malayo sa mga creeks, malayo sa mga ilog, no? For them to decide, ito palang ginawang mapa is pwede pala dito maglagay ng housing units, ng mga pabahay. That aids the decision makers decide, no, sa kanilang decisions, no, by visually presenting your map information, no, for their analysis. The fourth one is education, no. Map design facilitates understanding of geography, history, and various subjects. Okay, sa history, ginagamit yung mapa, ng mapa nung the first known map in the Philippines, no? Yung Las Islas de Filipinas, yung mapa na ginawa before na 1500s, no? And at the same time, mapa ginagamit din for territorial jurisdictions kung saan nandun yung pinag-aawayan yung South China Sea tsaka yung West Philippine Sea kung saan, 'di ba? Yung geography daw sabi ng China sa kanila daw 'yun, sabi ng Philippines sa kanila daw 'yun. So it's part of the education system yung pag-aaral ng mapa. And last is representation. It offers a visual presentation of the world, region, or specific phenomena. Ito nga yung sinasabi natin na sakop daw ng China yung South China Sea nga or yung West Philippine Sea, no? Pero yung pala is they're just looking at the source of oil, I think, no? Pinag-aagawan nila yung area. So anyway, that represents the world, regions, or specific phenomena. So here are the importance of map design again: effective communication, navigation, decision making, education, and representation. So ano ba ang principles ng magandang design? So we have here legibility and readability, simplicity, hierarchy, consistency, balance, contrast, harmony, and focal point. Okay? So ano ba itong number one? No? So it is the clarity and ease, no? Clarity and ease with which labels and symbols can be read on a map. For example, no, you are using syempre appropriate font sizes, styles, no, to ensure labels are easily readable. Pag gumawa ka ng mapa, dapat madaling basahin yung mga symbols or yung mga fonts mo kasi may gumamit ka diyan ng mga Comic Sans or Gothic na kung ano-ano. Make sure you use simple fonts, readable siya, no? For example, Roboto, yung mga ganyan, di ba? Times New Roman, o Arial, yung walang halong mga arts ba when it comes to walang harong mga extra lines, no? O gagamit ka ba ng Japanese font when you are here in the Philippines? Siyempre, yung legible siya and readable siya. Okay? Second one is simplicity. The idea that a map should convey information in a clear and straightforward manner, avoiding unnecessary complexity. So, for example, streamlining map elements to avoid overcrowding and confusion. So, dito naman, pag nag-present ka ng mapa, kung hindi naman kailangan yung ganitong mga symbol, yung ganitong mga words, yung ganitong mga colors, alisin mo na. Make it straight to the point. For example, meron kang mga lines. Either you have the line of road network and line for water hydrology map. When we say hydrology map, ang kulay niya lang is blue. So, dapat yung symbol na blue, yun lang makikita dyan. At the same time, if you are into a road, either black or white or yellow lang. No? Yun lang ang makikita sa mapa. Make it straight forward. Hindi mo na kailangan magkaroon pa ng color green if you are ano ba ang color green? No, if you are just presenting roads and water bodies, okay? Make sure to make it straightforward manner para wala nang nakakagulo pa sa ginagawa mong mapa. So let us continue on the third principle of map design, the hierarchy. Okay? So dito, you are organizing map elements in a way that it indicates their importance and relationships, no? Using different font sizes or colors or yung kanilang thickness, no? To highlight key features or information. For example, ang main line mo is red, okay? And it signifies it represents expressway, no? Sa DPWH kasi, it's not they have classified the roads into three. The national road, next one is provincial road, and then city road, and then barangay road. So yung hierarchy na tinatawag is yung i-indicate mo yung importance and relationship nila. For example, kung yung national road mo is ang thickness is 5. Color niya red. Yun ang main. Pagdating mo sa provincial road, red din siya, pero yung thickness niya 4 na lang. The next one, city road, 3 na lang yung thickness. Yung barangay road, 2 na lang yung thickness. So, doon pa lang sa hierarchy na yun, makikita mo na yung relationship nung road. Okay? So, that's hierarchy. The next one is consistency. So, ano naman ang consistency? When we say consistency, maintaining uniformity or uniform design, no? Design elements throughout the map, ensuring a consistent color, scheme, or labeling style across the entire map. So, yun nga, sinasabi ko sa'yo, pagka ang hierarchy mo is red, either you change the sizes or thickness ng road but maintaining the uniform design na puro red lang siya. Okay? So, that's consistency. Next one is balance. Distributing visual elements evenly to create a harmonious and aesthetically pleasing map. So, balancing the placement of labels, symbols, and other elements across the map. For example, ang pinakamapa mo is naka-center, no? So, balance siya kaagad. Ngayon, pagka meron kang nilagay na logo sa upper right corner, syempre maglagay ka naman na something icons or as well as images sa left side naman to have para maging balance ba. Kung meron kang label sa right side, magkaroon ka ng label sa left side. So, that's the balance, no? Balance elements across the map. The next one is contrast, no? Emphasizing differences between map features to enhance visibility and comprehension. Using contrasting colors for distinct geographic regions or highlighting important landmarks. So for example, na, yun nga, ang road network mo is black, ang rivers mo is blue. Okay, there's a contrast doon pa lang. Okay? At the same time, hindi mo pwedeng gamitin yung black doon sa river mo. Ang mangyari, baka ang magiging idea ng tao is contaminated yung river kasi black. Di ba? So, pagka highway mo black, ang river mo blue. Same time, kung ang boundary ng kabanatuan is ang area is color red, so ang kabilang bayan naman, for example, yung city, yung Palayan City, dapat iba rin yung kulay. No? So there's a contrasting way or on how we could distinct geographic regions or locations, no, by differentiate by difference of their colors, no? Ibang color ng Cabanatuan City, ibang color ng Palayan City, iba yung color ng Gapan City. So that's the contrast na tinatawag. Okay? You also have here the harmony, achieving a unified and cohesive look by integrating various design elements. Employing a color palette that complements the overall theme of the map. So, for example, you are using what do you call this? A palette or lighting colors of orange, for example, from darker red to lighter red. No? So, that's harmony. No? For example, yung gradient ba, no? For example, you are into COVID victims, no? Pagka mataas ang patients mo, dark red. Pagka light naman or none, yung iyong COVID patient, magiging lighter red or white. So, alam mo yung gradient niyan from dark to light. So that's harmony. Okay, na tinatawag. The last one is focal point. Ano man ting focal point na to? When we say focal point, it is designating central point of emphasis to guide the viewer's attention. Using color or size to make a specific area or feature stand out as the main focus. So for example, ang gusto mong i-plot sa mapa is yung provincial capital. Siyempre, ang gagamitin mong kulay dyan is red para makita ka agad ng tao. Or, lalakihan mo yung symbol, lalakihan mo yung icon para makita ka agad ng tao na yun talaga ang main focus ng iyong mapa. Okay? So, that's principles of map design. Okay? We have legibility and readability, simplicity, hierarchy, consistency, balance, contrast, harmony, and focal point. Okay?